Well, thanks, Bob. It's great to be here. I especially appreciated the previous symposium on military orthopedics. Our son-in-law is a career Air Force officer, and he's over there somewhere again. Well, I'm really deeply honored to be the recipient of the Dr. and Mrs. Elmer Nix Award. Dr. Nix certainly exemplified the best principles of medical ethics, and it's my desire to sustain the dignity of this lectureship and also of Elmer and Rosemary Nix. When I accepted to give this lecture, my concerns were that the audience of the Clinical Orthopedic Society deserved to hear a worthwhile and informative lecture. As I'm no longer in clinical practice, I don't think it's appropriate for me to talk on a scientific paper on how to do something in orthopedics. The procedures, techniques, and guidelines for best practices are currently changing so fast. And if you think about it, for those of you who've been out in practice for 8 or 10 years or even 5 or 6 years, very few of you are doing the procedures the way you learned them during your residency. So I had to come up with something, and actually that's easy to do because of our long-term relationship with Bob and Peggy Perutka. When I thought about them and how fortunate I've been to have this long-term relationship with them, that became the selection of my talk, Reflections on Relationships. Bob, your president, is unselfish, committed to a life of service to his family, patients, Clinical Orthopedic Society, Johns Hopkins, Duke Orthopedic alumni, and so it goes. Is that what you wanted me to say, Bob? So Bob and Peggy turned the light on for me, that is to talk on reflections on relationships. I've really been fortunate, for true quality relationships definitely have defined my orthopedic career. As I was collecting thoughts on this topic, it was apparent how defining these relationships have and still are. And very few of my comments will truly be original, but from my relationships, family, coaches, teachers, colleagues, lectures, and the written word. As Bob noted, I've been fortunate to serve in several leadership positions. But in the end, it's been so much more than that. These recognitions and awards clearly don't define one's gratification or success. Lasting, quality friendships do. Well, where did it all start? Like so many of us, it began with my father, who was a union leader in the United Mine Workers in West Virginia. I learned compassion and care from him as I watched him hand out $5 or $10 bills from his pocket to coal miners who were out of work in the dark days of West Virginia. Dad's generosity in helping the needy truly made an impression on me. I'd signed to go play football somewhere else, but I wanted to follow my father at the University of Kentucky. I think we were the first, or maybe not the first, but one of the first, father and son combination to play at the University of Kentucky. I learned strength and leadership from Dad. He told me in my younger years of playing football, he never wanted to see me carried off the field. As a leader, you have to be strong, able, and even though you don't feel like it at times. For example, Joe DiMaggio, one of my childhood heroes, was asked why he played so hard, even when he was hurt. He said, "There's always some kid out there who may be seeing me for the first time or the last time. I owe him my very best." I learned a similar lesson from my high school science teacher, Miss Bunsen Burner, God bless her. I had the severe flu one time. I was in the back row coughing and sneezing, putting my head down, and even though I was one of her better students, she looked back there and said, "One of you act like he's dying. We've got some learning here to do today." Well, of course, I was embarrassed and mortified, And that's the last time, seriously, that I ever tried to get sympathy from anybody. These comments stuck with me, and they helped me appreciate that no matter how bad you feel, whether you are injured, ill, down, angry, tired, you've got to maintain a strong appearance and controlled emotion as a leader. I am the doctor, they are the patients. And as Dr. Leonard Goldner used to say, the patient is sick, not you. The same control of your appearance and emotions must be maintained in front of the residents and faculty, no matter if you've been up all night or even 2 or 3 nights, as was common during our really busy replantation days when I think it was 1980, 81, we performed 180 replants. That's almost one every other night. But you've got to shave, shower, and appear fresh the next day. Your colleagues know how hard you've worked. You don't have to make a fuss over how hard you work or how honest you are. Just work hard and be honest. I learned not to make excuses if you want to be successful at any level of a chosen field. I learned this early in college life. When I fumbled the football in spring practice and our offensive coach, Ermal Allen, who was all SEC in football, basketball, and a champion golfer, he yelled at me for fumbling, and I said, "Coach, the quarterback never even got the ball to me." And man, did he jump on me. And he stated, "Urbaniak, I've been watching you to see if you can play." After that experience, I never tried to offer excuses again. Seriously, that episode made a lasting impression on me. By the way, I was fortunate to have some great coaches while in college at UK. Ed Rutledge, head coach of the New York Giants. Howard Schnellenberger, head coach, University of Miami, NCAA champions, and then went on to Baltimore. Ermal Allen, all SEC in 3 sports, offensive coordinator for Tom Landry at Dallas. Blanton Collier, world champions with the Cleveland Browns. Don Shula, head coach, Miami Super Bowl champions. Chuck Knotts, head coach, LA Rams, Seattle, and Buffalo. John North, head coach, New Orleans Saints. Bill Arnsparger, head coach, New York Giants and LSU AD. You'd think we'd have won a few ball games with that staff, but we weren't very good. Well, I learned a lot more than just football from these outstanding men and highly successful leaders. For example, teamwork, no excuses, perform under pressure, and most of all, how to handle adversity. And Lordy, I've experienced some of that. You know, we're often defined on how we react to failures, not our successes. Playing on a team of any kind at any level strengthens relationships, builds character, gives confidence. After playing football before crowds and on TV, performing in the operating room was always a relaxing experience for me. Well, let's go back a few years to high school again. Like most students, and you all, I was an honor student, played some ball, but it was not my association with student leaders or athletes that influenced my thoughts about life and understanding people, but rather some underachievers with whom I developed very strong relationships. My hometown of West Virginia was made up of a collection of immigrants from various European countries who had come to work in the coal mines. By the way, Nick Saban, the coach of Alabama, is from my hometown of Fairmont, West Virginia. It's best known for its pepperoni buns. For sure, it's not a culinary locale, as one magazine rated Dairy Cream as the 3rd best restaurant in Fairmont. I was accepted into the club, not really a gang, of these individuals who had not excelled or were not outstanding in academics or athletics, but they were a close-knit group called the Kaibos. They did not break the law, or at least collectively. They were guys like Lilacs, Bootsy, and Fats. They had a code of honor of trusting one another. I related well with these guys, although a few, if any, went on to higher education. Well, 2 of them did go to prison for trying to steal this caterpillar. I mean, how dumb can you be? Well, what was the outcome of this group and why am I telling this story? Well, when I was in medical school, a young doctor from my hometown and I got together and we transformed this group of basically non-achievers whose only mission in life was to have a good time into a respected society that became involved in community service. We did not give up on these guys. You've heard the expression that today's mighty oak was yesterday's nut that held its ground. Well, in the coal mining country of West Virginia, we say a diamond is simply a piece of coal that stuck with it. Well as Bootsy, Fats, and Lilacs, there was another Italian named Tony Spadoni, who was my boss when I worked for the city cutting filth or trash along the highway for 3 summers while in college. Now, I'm not singling out Italians as immigrants because as Polacks, we weren't welcome in the country club either. Our residents know of Tony Spadoni, a 60-year-old male who I thought was ancient at the time, and he was the originator of phrases like keep it a go and justa justa. At the end of the day, after I'd cut weeds with a sigh on the highway, we'd finish about 4 o'clock, and he would invariably come over and retrim my side. He did it every single day. It irritated the hell out of me, if you want to know the truth, because he obviously thought he could cut weeds better than I. Well, this experience was one of my lasting lessons. For later in life, when operating with the residents, I was not exactly pleased with the result, I made a point not to just polish over it for my own satisfaction. And if I did make some modifications, I attempted to do it gently and with some sensitivity. This also taught me not to micromanage. Well, and speaking of relations and Italians, reminds me of a story. A wealthy married man was having an affair with this Italian woman, and during one of their encounters, she informed him that she was pregnant. Well, so not to ruin his reputation, he said he would pay her a large sum of money if she would return to Italy and have the baby, and then he would pay for the child's education all the way through college, etc. And she said, well, how will you know when I have the baby? He said, oh, that's easy. Just send me a postcard and write on it spaghetti. Well, about 9 months later, a postcard came to his house, and his wife ran to him and said, honey, we've got this very strange postcard from Italy. He said, oh, just hand it to me, and I'll explain it later. He looked at the card, turned white, and fainted, because on it was written, spaghetti, spaghetti, spaghetti. 2 with meatballs and 1 without. Well, during my residency, I developed the strongest relationships of any period, except for my family, because several of these relationships have continued through 5 decades. I had the wonderful opportunity to be with many of them this summer at our Duke alumni meeting in Greece, where nearly 100 members, along with their families, came. We all cherish these long-lasting relationships. I learned more from the resident just ahead of me, or my chief resident, than any other of our teachers. That's the way this hierarchical relationship was. And I'm sure many of you experienced these learning relationships during your residency. We spent more time together than with any other individual. They do less now with the ADR restriction. And we developed a bond of trust, as we all had the same passion to learn to become good orthopedics. As they say, if you love it, you'll learn it. Dr. J. Leonard Goldner preceded me as chair of orthopedics at Duke, and without a doubt, he's the greatest teacher I ever had. I learned a great deal about doctor-patient relationship from time to time, as he took time with each patient, no matter their financial status or social status. He listened to them, a great listener, whereas a recent study showed that the average doctor listens to his patient or interrupts them after they've talked for only 14 seconds. Unbelievable. Not Dr. Goldner. I learned the importance of always touching every patient, sit down during their discussion, if appropriate, and obtain a very thorough history and physical exam. Besides being a great teacher, Dr. Goldner was without a doubt the most positive character I've ever known. As a story, it could be an example. He was examining a foot one time that had a triple arthrodesis. And he was examining it in front of us, the residents, and he said, "There's motion there. It's imperceptible, but I can feel it." As they say, he also believed that everybody was entitled to his opinion, Dr. Goldner's opinion. As they say, young people know the rules and old people know the exceptions. That was certainly true of Leonard Goldner. And by the way, speaking of role models, as a child I had rheumatic fever at age 7, and Dr. Joe came to our house every day for more than 3 months while I was in bed. And that, because of his compassion and care, is why I decided to become a physician. I also think he might have been having some kind of platonic affair with my grandmother. Well, my residency, as you heard, was interrupted by 2 years in the United States Navy, at which time I served as the attending physician to the United States Congress. And my office, and this still is located right beneath the rotunda. And I treated senators and congressmen as well as members of the Supreme Court. What I really learned from this experience was how hardworking many of these individuals were and how dedicated they were to serving our country, not at all like the many negative comments we see in the news today. However, they did seem to be a little bit more proactive then. As a 28-year-old physician, I became very comfortable treating and advising these leaders in our political world. And my office was an escape for them, apolitical, and they often confided in me. I developed and maintained some strong relationships with many of these congressmen, which I maintained long after I left Capitol Hill. Time does not permit me to tell many of these stories of interest, but I will say several of these distinguished congressmen made a lasting impression on me because of their devoted commitment to our country while maintaining high ethical standards and also shying away from fanfare. Since my good friend Arnold Palmer told me not to drop names, I won't tell any of the stories. Well, times have changed in the past couple of months, for I saw where Joe Manchin, our junior senator from West Virginia, complained that, quotes, "Nobody knows anybody in Washington anymore. It's amazing. There just aren't enough relationships. You've got to build relationships, even if they are not perfect," end of quote. I also saw just last week where our United States senators rarely eat in the Senate dining room hall anymore, whereas in the 60s and the 70s, this was the greatest setting for developing strong relationships among our fellow senators. Well, many fascinating relationships in Washington served me well in the future. One was not on Capitol Hill. I used to go to Tuesday night grand rounds at Georgetown under the leadership of their chairman, George Hyde. For 2 years, I sat next to this elderly orthopedic surgeon and gentleman by the name of Laszlo Ormandy. He was the brother of Eugene Ormandy of the Philadelphia Philharmonic Orchestra. I helped him with his hat and coat, and we talked. He'd graduated, or he'd spent a year at Duke in the 1950s in orthopedic surgery. Well, he died at the age of 93, and he left Duke Orthopedic Surgery over $3 million for the Laszlo Ormandy chair. That was a rewarding relationship indeed. I joined the Duke Orthopedic faculty in 1969. And we just started taking international fellows then, and Dr. Goldner put me in charge of all of them. And my response was, well, why me? Well, it was somewhat difficult at first as I was trying to develop my practice and find my way in research, etc. And these individuals required a great deal of time and attention. Subsequently, these international fellows became one of the greatest rewards of being in academic medicine. I helped train over 80 of them from more than 20 countries. The first international fellow came from Italy, the next one from Greece. We trained over 21 Greeks, and of the 7 chairmen in Greece now, 5 of them trained with us at Duke. This Greek-American connection is actually spread to now 7 or 8 other orthopedic programs throughout the United States, and the significant combined contributions from this relationship are really voluminous. I was fortunate to have a team of leaders in the laboratory to nurture these international fellows. Tony Sieber, a compassionate and caring individual from England, helped the internationals rent apartments, buy automobiles, advise them in their family situations, girlfriends, etc. He developed a strong relationship with all of them. He had no degree higher than high school, but he was relationship personified. I learned from Tony about compassion and giving care to our international fellows by including their families, not just being concerned about their academic accomplishments. We won the Kappa Delta Award together, the highest research award in orthopedic surgery, from a team made up of an Iranian, a Brit, a Chinese, and a Polak. All dear friends. I always made a point to give them my time and attention and emphasize how important they were to our program. 10 to 20% of the residents required 80 to 90% of my time. These are the ones that are the most difficult, but our goal was always to help them to be better residents, not to run their lives. It's kind of similar with your patients. 10 to 20% of your patients require 80% of your time. In both instances, it's important to listen and have them develop a trust in you. If all residents were great, teaching would be easy and we'd have no challenges. However, during my 17 years of head of orthopedics, we had few outliers, but I did find it necessary to fire 3 of them, which were very trying times indeed. But I will say that all 3 of them accepted their changes in pathway of training to another specialty as gentlemen. We worked this out together. I did not just drop them. Now you get an email. I had no favorites as residents. As an example, once a month I went to Crippled Children's Clinic at Clinton, Moorhead, and Camp Lejeune. We spent 8 hours or 9 hours together in the car and had 5 meals with a few beers and wine, spent the night together. Obviously, it was a great chance to get to know our residents. In the summer, sometimes they brought their wives and children down to the coast for the weekend. The chief resident asked me who I wanted to go to the clinic with, and I always stated, you pick them. Sometimes I thought I was going to have to deal with residents who had some difficult personalities. Some were even odd in some ways. I thought it might be a taxing weekend, but this was never the case. I found out how wrong I was about my primary early judgment of them, and after spending this time together, seeing patients, dining, wining, sometimes swimming, fishing, and golfing, I learned that our differences were mainly my weaknesses in judgment. They were all good. We developed a better relationship for the next 3 or 4 years of their training. It reminded me of the book about Lincoln, Team of Rivals, by Doris Kearns Goodwin, in which he picked 5 of his staunchest political adversaries to be members of his cabinet, and together they made great accomplishments during a difficult period of our history. Also, the heroic story of Sir Ernest Shackleton, who one historian labeled the greatest leader on earth, the greatest leader that ever came on God's earth, bar none. In 1914 to 1916, his ship was stranded in the Antarctic for nearly 2 years, and he saved the lives of all 27 of the men. One particular act that he did that gained the respect of all crew members is that he picked the 2 least desirable men, the ones most difficult to get along with, and he slept with them every night in a small pup tent during this incredible period of survival. I recall a former resident who did not agree with the decision I made, and he called me some very uncomplimentary name. Our friendship was temporarily broken. A couple years later, I gave him special recognition at one of our annual meetings, and he was shocked that I would praise him. I learned a couple of lessons. Don't let a little dispute destroy a good friendship or relationship, and the best way to get rid of your enemies is to turn them into your friends. We've since helped each other academically and professionally in many ways. I also recently supported him for a national position. It's important to enjoy the people who work around you every day. In the clinic, office, operating room, and I always made an effort to say thank you to the personnel in the operating room before I left. I learned this from my friend, Dr. Frank Bassett. These comments of gratitude were appreciated more than I can imagine. For example, a former nurse anesthetist and her husband, a gynecologist, recently donated $20 million to our orthopedic sports medicine program, mainly based on our mutual respect for each other during our training. I once read in a local newspaper about a CEO in a small Ohio town who made some profits, so he gave all the people that worked for him a bonus. In other words, he shared his success with those that helped him get there. I kept that in mind and thought if I ever made some money somewhere, I would do the same. Well, I did receive some monetary awards, and I distributed this cash as well as some other gifts to our personnel in orthopedics, actually about 125 every time we reached a certain goal. Of course, this was a very popular gesture, but I stress it was not just the material gifts that bonded our relationships. I believe there was a genuine feeling of being appreciated. From a different angle, I have a relationship about a newspaper man, true story. Every Sunday morning when I would go to work to make grounds, I had a white coat on, and I would stop and buy a newspaper from this one-legged man who was selling it on the corner like they do. I gave him $1.50 each time, but I never took his newspaper. And he would always say, "Thanks, Doc." This went on for a few years. And then, after 2 or 3 months, he quit saying, "Thanks, Doc." So I stopped and said, "You used to say, 'Thanks, Doc.' How come you don't do it anymore?" He said, "Doc, the newspapers are now $1.75. So this is not what you'd call an impassionate relationship. Just as it's important to show appreciation, it's important also not to offend others. If you want to be a winner, it's certainly not wise to offend individuals who you most need on your side. It takes an idiot to do that. Just like I never understood why kamikaze pilots wore helmets. It just didn't make sense. I don't know. Some people seem to look for fault in others, as if there's a reward for it. I've learned not to look to stir up trouble. You'll be the real loser. It's a waste of time. It's important to listen to residents and faculty. You learn more from listening than talking. As noted, I've served on numerous executive committees and boards, and I took the posture to listen for 1 or 2 years before I said much of anything, as I was usually younger than the other people on the board. I followed the principle that the skill of listening is greater than the skill of speaking. To listen because even a fool was right sometimes. You don't have to be noisy to be effective. It must have worked because I was eventually a leader of some of these boards. We've heard the expression that it's lonely at the top. Well, I did not find that so, for if you stay connected with the friends that got you there, it's not lonely. I don't believe in the idiom about eagles soar alone is appropriate analogy for effective leadership. When I was in Turkey a few years ago, I ran across this old Turkish proverb: "No road is long with good company." You have to get to know those you lead. I learned that an educator has to respect his students to be an effective leader. Let them know you care about them. I recall many years ago, as a resident, Dr. Leonard Goldner called me on Christmas when he knew I was alone. It meant a lot to me. This leads me to a few words about leadership. I've learned not to use words like absolutely, always, perfect, for we know these states rarely exist in life. Instead, I prefer words or expression with vision or commitment. I've always liked that TV ad with the military. Be all you can be. It says and means a lot. In fact, I get a tear in my eye every time I read it. It's important to connect emotionally as well as intellectually when you're talking on the telephone. As I've informed my staff, be sure and smile when you're talking, as they can hear it in your voice. These genuine expressions of emotional connection are difficult with text messages and emails. I prefer direct phone calls, eye-to-eye contact, and a firm handshake. I also feel it's important that the leader work harder than anyone else. I actually took night call once a week until I was 68 years of age. However, I really enjoyed this except for the occasional inconvenience. I've always chosen not to separate work and play, and have truly enjoyed both of them. Persistence is also a key attribute. I know we wrote a few NIH grants 3 times before they were accepted. It was well worth it, as we were funded for over 25 years. I'm reminded of Michael Jordan stating that he was in a position 26 times to make a winning field goal before he finally made one. You've got to be persistent and take some calculated risk. In closing, medical education needs more role models of compassion, caring, and giving physicians who uphold the ethical values of Elmer Nix. It is especially true in this age of electronic medical records and electronic images and communication. There's less hands-on, less examples of service and compassion for medical students and residents to follow, and they do follow. In our relationships, working with our patients, it's important to remember that people first want to know how much you care before they care how much you know. This was so well portrayed in the movie with Robin Williams as Patch Adams. In our medical profession, patients share a confidence that few others are fortunate to experience, a treasured relationship. It's a privilege and a joy to provide a caring service. My life has not been a job, but a way of living. The word doctor comes from the Latin word doctere, which means to teach. I could only be one of 3 possessions: teacher, doctor, or coach. Even though I'm no longer in active practice, and I spend 1/3 to half of my day in responding to individuals seeking patient care of some type. I am what I am, a doctor, and always will be. I don't pass the buck, even without secretarial help now, but I respond to each of them and make a connection myself with the appropriate physician. Some of you know that. If not, check me out sometime. Not only must we have the trust and respect of our colleagues and patients, but also it's important in everyday life. Witness the improper discretions and behaviors of some of our politicians, mayors, senators, athletic coaches, players, priests, even the atomic security officers who were supposedly cheating on tests in recent months. Not the right kind of relationships and behavior. One has to be a good person behind their words. It instills a strong and lasting legacy. I believe it was Mark Twain who stated, "You are what you are when no one else is looking." It's just like that golf ball in the woods. You can move it or play it by the rules. Ethics define what we ought to do. Ethics are above and beyond the law. A Pew study in February of 2014 revealed that the millennium generation have less trust in their fellow men. Only 19%, that is 1 out of 5, say most people can be trusted. Why? Well, it's not known, and in the article they related it maybe to recession and diversity. But I think it's more related to our change in methods of communication. Electronic messages over direct face-to-face discourse. Of course, my most powerful and rewarding relationship has been with my wife, Muff, a Duke Nursing School graduate, as you saw. As I've said many times, her genuine compassion and giving in the nursing tradition have made me a happy man. I know Peggy has the same experience with Bob as a nurse. I've reflected on some examples of how powerful these relations in my life, that is father, teammates, classmates, residents, etc., have influenced or defined my career. This story is not about what I have done or accomplished, but rather what I've learned or benefited from these relationships, some which have truly become an integral part of me. I believe trusting relationships are the key to success in any field. Success depends on quality relationships, friendships we develop and maintain at all levels. Now, if some of my comments seem too personal, I really apologize. But it's my way of saying thanks to you and to many of my friends and friends like you for being such a meaningful part of my life. So in the words of Tony Spadoni, keep it to go.